So, tonight we're going to be talking a bit about the dating of Paul's letters, how the letter to the Romans helps us date Paul's letters. I think that something that some people that question the dating of Paul's letters need to think about is the letter to the Romans. So, I'm going to be talking about this a bit myself tonight. So, let me just go ahead and begin by sharing screens. Just give me one moment. All right, this should work. Let me put this on full screen. All right, so we've got Romans 16 in front of us. Now, it says in Romans 16, verse 3, greet Prisca and Aquila, my co-workers in Christ Jesus. So he's writing to people in Rome, specifically, that are that have in the exile that Paulus Orosius and other ancient historians like Suetonius and others talk about, which occurred in the year 50. We'll get to those exact texts in just a second. But I want to focus a bit on this letter. One moment. Romans 16 verse 3 is the one is the thing that we really need to remember here, because in Acts of the Apostles it mentions that they were removed from Rome when Emperor Claudius in the year 50 ordered them to be expelled, ordered that the Jewish population be expelled from Rome. And on the right, that's a depiction of Claudius, if anyone's curious. So, given that Romans 16, which is obviously the final chapter of the letter to the Romans, is saying that they're still in Rome, then the letter to the Romans had to be logically composed prior to the year 50. And I would say probably about 49 CE. But given that Romans is one of Paul's last letters, some might even suggest the last one, unless you go with my position that 2 Timothy is authentic, because I think it is. But 2 Timothy is the last letter instead. But in either case, you would have to believe that Paul's letters were either nearly all or were all composed by the late 40s. So this would put Paul's ministry, rather than in the 50s, in the 40s. Now, even those that defend a 50s dating for the text will still say that Paul did conduct missionary activity in the 40s, with his vision taking place most likely during the mid to late 30s CE. Let me check my sound settings real quick. Okay, everything's fine. So, we're going to be taking a look at the rest of the text here in just a second. But Romans 16 immediately places the letter to the Romans that Paul wrote, most likely around 49 CE. There's another important clue that we're going to take a look at in 2 Thessalonians, and how that also correlates with what Roman historians have to say about events taking place in 41 CE. But before we get to that, let's take some of these questions here. Super chat questions will be prioritized, but I'll also be willing to take some free questions tonight. Let's start with Run and Shoot. Run says, how many of these names in Romans appear in Marcion's Apostolicon version of Romans? So this question is interesting. Romans in the Apostolokon is actually rather short, much shorter than the one we have right now. And of course, this question would be, the answer to that question would be more disturbing if one were to accept the priority of the Apostolokon. Most scholars do not use the Apostolokon to access the original Paul. You would have to suggest that canonical Paul is a heavily manipulated form of the Apostolokon if one accepts the priority of the Apostolokon. So I don't buy that. I think the Apostolokon is abbreviating canonical Paul. And I think some of the evidence of that is in Galatians, the Apostolokon's version of Galatians. And it says, well, actually, it looks just like the one we have now. There's just a couple of interesting things that's missing from it, such as born of a woman and brother of the Lord, and the 3 years that Paul spent with Barnabas. Those 3 things are omitted in the Apostolokon's version of Galatians. And I find that rather curious, especially brother of the Lord and born of a woman missing from the text. I would have to say this was done in order to harmonize Paul's epistles with the gospel of the Lord, which wasn't written by Marcion, by the way. That's a much earlier text. Because removing born of a woman and brother of the Lord, by doing that, you would be removing theological background to Jesus given by Paul, such as that Jesus was born as a human being, born of a woman, and that he had a brother called James. So it's really, let me correct myself. I said theological background. Biographical background is what I meant to say, but for a theological reason. Because the gospel of the Lord denies that Jesus was born on earth. It denies that. Just read the very beginning of it. He descended from heaven down to earth in the 15th year of Emperor Tiberius. That's what it says. There was no birth. So that would be 29 CE, by the way. That's the 15th year of Tiberius. How do you harmonize that with Paul's letters? Well, the only way to do it is you would have to go through them. An editor would have to create a different collection of Paul's letters. Go through them. I don't even think Marcion was responsible for that. I think it was somebody else, but regardless of whoever did it, someone did it. Somebody went through it and created the Apostolokon. And this was done no earlier than the beginning of the 2nd century, I would say. And you have to go through there, comb through the text, and remove any evidence, any biographical evidence provided by Paul about Jesus's earthly origins. You would have to get rid of it. Because if you don't, then born of a woman and the brother of the Lord would contradict the Lord's gospel. Because if Jesus wasn't born, then he can't have brothers. So let's say you go through the text. Let me rephrase that. I'm repeating myself from what I've already said. So that's why this was done. You have to, the Apostolokon, the editor of the Apostolokon, had to remove those references because it blatantly contradicts the Lord's gospel, and there's no way around it. And so the text was omitted. That's why this was done. For this reason, I don't trust the Apostolokon, because I think it's rather obvious that's what it's doing. It's removing material out of Paul's letters that contradicts the Lord's gospel. So that's the main reason I don't buy that it is earlier than canonical Paul. Now, those that advocate for the priority of the Apostolokon will obviously say, I'm assuming canonical Paul was earlier, and I'm assuming that it's abbreviating. But given that these texts were written after the writings of Josephus, And Josephus clearly states that James is Jesus' brother. How do we get around that? Obviously, the earliest Christians believed that Jesus had a brother called James. We have other texts, and Josephus attests to it himself, that Jesus is James's brother, who died in 62 CE. And so how do we deal with that? Because I think the problem is what I like to call the Apostolicon's paradox is if we have to assume that the Apostolocon is a representation of the earlier version of Paul, of an earlier version of Paul, but maybe not the exact original, because another position is the Apostolocon isn't exactly the original, but it's closer to the original. Well, if you want to go with that, that's fine. But you're going to have to wrestle with that the earliest Christians think that Jesus had brothers. So are we to say that Paul didn't originally think that Jesus had a brother? You see my problem here? That just doesn't work very well, I would say. That doesn't work. Elizabeth says, I like Dr. Tabor's viewpoint, also Simco Jacobovici's. Well, I agree with them that the Talpiot tomb is the tomb of Jesus and his family. I love their work on that. And there are several things that Dr. Tabor says about Paul that I agree with, but I tend to side with Dr. Adam Chesky's dating of the letters. I think that the letters are better dated to the 40s, but that's just my view, of course. Let me take a look at this. Okay. Just making sure that wasn't a PayPal super chat, because some people just PayPal the question rather than super chatting through here. Speaking of, I wish that StreamYard had a PayPal system, so that way somebody super chatted through PayPal, it could be shown here as well. But alas, that doesn't exist right now. Maybe it will someday. Other streaming services offer that because I've seen that before, but not here. Let's see what Run has to say. Again, the version of the Gospel of the Lord on the early Christian writings that says Jesus ascended to Capernaum. Couldn't that mean descend from the Temple Mount at Jerusalem back down into Galilee? No, it nowhere in that Gospel does it say that Jesus had brothers. Nowhere. He descends from heaven, full-grown man, 15th year of Tiberius, and that's the beginning of Jesus' ministry. There's no brother of Jesus anywhere in the Gospel of the Lord. That's why the Apostolic was created. Okay. Let's get back to Romans 16. Just going to have to give me a second here. All right. Paulus Orosius, he's a much later historian, says that the Jewish population was removed from Rome, exiled from Rome, expelled from Rome in the 9th year of Emperor Claudius. That's what he says. We're going to be taking a look at the exact text of that in just a second. I'll have myself back on the camera in just a second. So the text we're going to be looking at is Acts, and we're going to be looking at uh, Paulus and Rhodia side by side, because that's the best way, in my opinion, to look at this. Sorry for the delay. Almost ready. I didn't plan to have this text in here originally, so that's why it's taking me a second. I'm adding them in here. Almost done. Let me see. All right, that's where it is. Okay. All right, I'm about ready. So let's pull the text up. Put it back in full screen here. Hold on. Acts 18 is showing in the wrong place. It would look weird if I showed it. That's much better. Much better. Okay, let's pull the text back up. All right, so I don't typically favor using Acts to reconstruct a historical Paul. There's a slight exception to be made here because this is quite significant. The letter to the Romans is quite specific. And by the way, 2 Thessalonians isn't on this page. It looks like that's doing what Acts 18 was doing, showing up in the previous page without the rest of the text. So I'll fix that in just a second. But let's just take a look at this right now. Acts 18 has Paul hanging around with Aquila and Priscilla after they were expelled from Rome in the year 50. Give me 1 second. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. Haven't done a stream like this in a while. Anyway, let's get this done. So Acts chapter 18 has Aquila and Priscilla being expelled from Rome in 50. So that Paul's letter to the Romans is before this. So this is one of the many places in Acts that contradicts Paul's letter to the Romans. But not just the letter to the Romans, but all the letters, practically. Acts of the Apostles contradicts Paul's letters over and over and over again, including when the vision happened, when Paul's conversion happened. But I'm not here to talk about all the contradictions. I'll be tackling those issues another time in a series I'm going to do on Acts. We can't have it both ways. We can't have a letter to the Romans written after 50 because of Acts. Because Acts 18 doesn't work with that. It just doesn't. There's no way around it. It's not a matter of an opinion on this one. It's quite specific. Aquila and Priscilla are no longer in Rome by 50 AD, CE. By 50 CE, they're out. It's not ambiguous. It's clear as day. They're out. So the letter to the Romans had to be written before 50. Or if you want to date to 50, then before the expulsion happened within the year 50. But I think that would be a little difficult to do. I think 49 CE is better. But either way, you still have to say it's before the expulsion. You still have to say that. So on the right, we have the Historiam Adversum, Paganos, the history of the pagans, by Paulus Orosius, who appears to be citing a text of Josephus that we don't have. Josephus reports in his 9th year, the Jews were expelled by Claudius from the city. But Suetonius, who speaks as follows, influences me more. Claudius expelled from Rome the Jews constantly rioting at the instigation of Christ. As far as whether we had commanded that the Jews rioting against Christ and be restrained and checked, or also have wanted the Christians as persons of a cognate religion to be expelled, it's not at all to be concerned. It is not at all to be discerned. Excuse me. So Paulus Orosius, as far as I understand it, is the only ancient writer that seems to provide a very specific year as to when the expulsion happened. And some use this to support the year 49 CE as the date, but that makes no sense to me. Because if you count 9 years from Emperor Claudius's first year, which is 41 CE, then you land on the year 50 CE. So it happened in 50. And as far as I understand it, there's no problem dating it to the year 50 anyway. It doesn't surprise me that there's texts of Josephus that are being cited that are lost. I don't think we have everything Josephus wrote. It looks like we have most of it, but not all of it. Notice here, Paulus Orosius doesn't tell us which text he's talking about. He's not claiming it's in the Antiquities of the Jews, or the Wars of the Jews, or in the Aramaic Wars of the Jews, which, if you believe Robert Eisler about the Slavonic Josephus, is in fact a translation of the lost Aramaic Wars of the Jews, which I actually believe that. I don't buy that. It's a late fake. I don't think that doesn't make any sense to me. Then if any of those texts were cited here to support this quote that Paulus Orosius is talking about, then I would agree. Paulus Orosius is an error. But he's not. He's not telling us where it came from. He's not. It might be the case that Josephus had another text in which he covered the history of Claudius, or at least part of it, in which he makes mention of the 9th year of the Jew. In the 9th year of Claudius, the Jews were expelled. That's my best guess. And the least amount of speculation that I can do here on my part. And let's take a look at the next reference. And we'll talk a little bit about that, but I'm going to be getting off. I'll be going on someone else's YouTube channel tomorrow to be talking about Paul's historical Jesus. It'll be at I'll share it to the community tab. So keep an eye on that. It's gonna be about the dating of Paul's letters. I'll be covering some of the same stuff that I'm covering here, well, practically all of it. But I'm also going to be talking about why arguing a Memphis disposition from Paul's letters is hopeless, in my view. Okay, this is from 2 Thessalonians. So now we're talking about the son of lawlessness. Let me go back a page. This here is a depiction of Emperor Caligula, statue of Caligula, a little statue. And Caligula in 41 CE, or by that time, declared himself to be a deity. And he wanted to put a statue of himself in Jerusalem, in the temple, I think it was. In fact, I should probably have text talking about that as well. Suetonius talks about this. In which he says that. Yeah. Okay, I remembered correctly. Yes. He wasn't just going to put it in Jerusalem. He was going to put it inside the temple. That's what I thought. I was just taking a look at that. So this correlates exactly to what 2 Thessalonians says about the son of lawlessness. We see that Caligula is violating both Roman and Jewish law simultaneously. It is the only first century CE Roman emperor that appears to do so. Emperor Domitian comes close, but he never commanded that a statue or image of himself be placed within the temple of Jerusalem. We have no evidence of this. But Caligula most certainly attempted that. And there's a plot to assassinate him. And he gets assassinated, matching the description of the son of lawlessness. And the way it talks about that Jesus is coming and the son of lawlessness will be defeated appears to be that the authors of 2 Thessalonians, Paul, Silas, and Timothy, are rejoicing at the death of Caligula as Jesus' vengeance upon him for what he tried to do. But if one were to believe this, you would have to date 2 Thessalonians very early, declare it to be authentic as well. Second Thessalonians is disputed in scholarship. There are a bunch of scholars that say it is authentic, and there are a bunch of others that say it's not. I say it is authentic. Therefore, I would date it to about 41 CE, after Caligula's death, but not long after his death. Some might claim it's just looking back, but I would need evidence of 2 Thessalonians being aware of events taking place far later than Caligula's death to be convinced of that. But so far, I have not encountered good arguments for that. By the way, the references is in Suetonius' Life of Caligula. I'm just going to do a pre-recorded video at some point later talking about this, in which I have all the relevant information edited in it. Because I was just coming out here for fun, doing a live stream. No, I'm not going through all the evidence right now. But I will, most definitely, in that pre-recorded video. So I'm going to go ahead and take this off the screen. I will show the text for all that later. Some of you can just look it up already in Suetonius's Life of Caligula. But it's there. It's definitely there. And another thing that I will mention is 2 Corinthians mentioning King Aretas, who Paul fled from in 37 CE. That's another one. That's late 30 CE. That's very early, just a few years after Jesus' crucifixion. And Paul is already going to town. All of these things, I think, are very strong indicators that an early dating of Paul's letters works well with the evidence. At least that's my view. James Valiant says Philo and Josephus cover Caligula's plan as does Suetonius. Yeah, that's true. I'm going to be showing all that in that pre-recorded video later. Just didn't get around to it tonight. JM, thank you for your super chat. Appreciate it. Thank you for the thumbs up. Let's see if there's any more questions in the chat before I close. Solo Spiritus says hello. Well, hello back. This person said that right at the beginning of the stream. Sorry about that. I didn't get around to it didn't get around to you until right at the end. Just making sure I didn't get any PayPal questions. Well, I think that's it for now. So I'm going to go ahead and call it a night. So I thank everybody for attending the stream and asking the questions. And I thank JM again for the super chat. And I'll see everybody later.
Hello viewers, thanks for watching this video from the History Valley YouTube channel. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And if any of you wish to further support this channel, please consider checking out this channel's Patreon page and becoming a patron, and or donate through PayPal or through Super Chat during your live stream. Thank you.